If it's Tuesday, a major move at the White House on a top issue for voters as President Biden announces new executive actions that could shield 500,000 undocumented immigrants from being deported. Plus, former President Trump holding a campaign rally right now in battleground Wisconsin, days after he reportedly called the state's biggest city and the site of the upcoming Republican National Convention, quote, horrible. And renewed fears of a widening war in the Middle East as the White House sends an envoy to Lebanon to try to ramp down the tensions on Israel's northern border, with no signs of progress on a ceasefire deal with Hamas. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington, where moments ago, President Biden announced new executive actions that would shield nearly 500,000 undocumented spouses of American citizens from deportation. The move comes as the debate over immigration is top of mind for voters this election season. President Biden announced the actions at a White House event marking the 12th anniversary of DACA, the Obama-era policy that gives undocumented young immigrants brought to the U.S. by their families permanent legal status. Here's some of what the president had to say.
Second action I'm announcing today was about keeping families together. My dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, family's about the beginning, middle, and the end. About keeping couples together who are married, where one spouse is a U.S. citizen, the other is undocumented. They've been living in the United States for at least 10 years. These couples have been raising families, sending their kids to church and school, paying taxes, contributing to our country for 10 years or more. All this time, with fear and uncertainty. We can fix that, and that's what I'm going to do today.
As you heard the president explain, the new executive actions will shield undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation. It applies to those who've lived in the country for 10 years or more as of yesterday. They will have 3 years to apply for permanent residency. It will also cover any non-citizen children of those immigrants. The president also announced executive action that will allow DACA recipients to receive work visas more quickly if they earn a college degree from a U.S. institution and have an employment offer in a field related to their degree. Ahead of today's White House event, NBC's Julia Ainsley spoke with Javier Quiros Castro, who introduced the president and says the new action will impact him.
An action like this has been way overdue. People said the same thing about DACA, that it wasn't necessary, that it was overstepping. And DACA has turned out to be a very successful program. So I don't see it as a bad thing. In fact, I see it as life-changing in a positive way for hundreds of thousands of families and people. America is going to be stronger because of this.
We'll speak to Julia in just a moment, and you can watch more of her interview tonight on NBC Nightly News. Today's announcement at the White House comes just 2 weeks after the administration's executive action drastically restricting asylum claims at the southern border, which prompted backlash from immigration advocates and some Democrats. Though a recent poll shows voters largely approve of the action. Immigration tops the issues Americans are focused on ahead of November's election. And it is an issue where former President Trump has consistently seen an advantage over President Biden. Today, the former president slamming the new action, accusing Biden of, quote, mass amnesty. The president shot back in his remarks, accusing his 2024 opponent of playing politics with the border and immigration. Joining me now from the White House is NBC's Aaron Gilchrist, and NBC Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley is here with me on set. Thank you both for being here. Aaron, I want to start with you. Tell us more about these new executive actions. They don't take effect today, so when can we expect to see that happen?
Yeah, President Biden said that this action, this order would take effect at the end of the summer. It would be a multi-step process, really, that he says this order serves to streamline the pathway to citizenship for this specific group of people that you referenced. We're talking about non-citizens who've been in the United States for at least 10 years and are married to a U.S. citizen. They would be able to step forward as undocumented people and start the green card process without really this fear of deportation. They, of course, would be subject to all the standard paperwork and all the legal requirements that would usually come with getting a green card. But this really allows them, again, to step out of the shadows as they go through that process without the fear of being deported back to the country from which they come. And the president says, as you noted, Gabe, this is really about trying to keep families together. And that's something that his administration has said they had put in the legislation that they proposed at the beginning of the Biden administration. And since that is not something that made it through Congress and again failed to get through Congress at the end of last year, now the president says it's the appropriate time for him to take this executive action to try to keep families together, husbands and wives, and their children as well. This would serve to affect potentially about 50,000 children of these sorts of couples, Gabe.
And Aaron, we should also note that when it comes to the undocumented spouses, this is not a magic wand, right? There's still case-by-case approval. So how do we expect that process to play out?
Yeah, you're right. This is a multi-step, potentially multi-year process for people to go through to get this permanent resident status, and it's something that they're going to have to engage in over the course of time. This order also includes the possibility for people to apply for work permits. They would have 3 years to complete this residency application process, and in that 3 years, they could be allowed to work here in the United States, contribute legally to the economy, pay taxes, things of that nature. And so the president in many ways sees it as a win for not only these families, but for the U.S. economy as well. He made note of that in his comments today, too, Gabe.
And Aaron, the other big part of this is getting DACA recipients work visas more quickly. So what does the administration expect the economic impact of this new policy will be?
Yeah, that was something the president addressed in his remarks today. He said that business owners and CEOs in this country understand that they serve to benefit from the steps that are being taken today, and that the U.S. economy would benefit. Essentially, what he said was it relates to DACA recipients and dreamers, that they would be able to, if they had an education that they obtained here in the United States, and received a degree, and they had a job offer here in the United States, they would then be able to get work permits so that they could work here. So if they benefit from the education system in this country, they should be able to work here, the president says, and contribute to the economy. And he sees that particular part of this executive order, again, as a benefit for the U.S. economy, Gabe.
And Aaron, of course, as we mentioned, this comes in an election year, of course, after a few months of a rightward shift on immigration for the administration. On a political level, does the White House hope to send a message to progressives and immigration advocates that the president is on their side?
Yeah, the press secretary was asked that question today by our colleague Kelly O'Donnell, whether they were trying to balance out some of the action that was taken earlier this month. You'll remember it was about 2 weeks ago when the president, the first executive order that he signed this month was one that would create a situation where people who cross the border illegally, the southern border illegally, would not be able to apply for asylum. And if the number of people coming across reached a certain threshold, and then, of course, this would be temporary until that number went back down. And there were a lot of organizations, entities that did not support that action. The ACLU, along with some other groups, are suing the Biden administration at this point as a result of that executive order. And so the question was, does this serve to balance some of that? The White House says, no, that's not the case here. This is really about understanding that there is a broken immigration system in this country, and the president has been pushed into a place where he has to take some executive action because Congress failed to do so. Gabe?
Aaron Gilchrist at the White House. Aaron, thank you. I want to turn now to Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, who, of course, covers immigration and the border so well and is steeped in all this policy. Julia, how permanent will today's executive action be? You know, depending on the election, we were just talking about the politics of all this with Aaron. What's to stop if former President Trump is elected for a Trump administration just doing away with this?
Yeah, look, they have 3 years to apply, but probably most people who are eligible for this are going to try to apply as quickly as they can. The one thing that could give these people more hope than DACA recipients is if they can get on the path quickly to getting a green card and becoming a citizen, then that would be harder to revoke. They could overturn the policy, keep new people from applying, but just as we saw with DACA, it's very hard to take something away from people, a status, once they already have it. But yes, yes, we could definitely see a challenge from a future potential Trump administration. In fact, today, former President Trump came out calling this mass amnesty, and it could also be that we get a lawsuit even before the election.
So that was my next question. How is the administration preparing for legal challenges here? Because the executive action just a few weeks ago has already seen a lawsuit from the ACLU. This might get a lawsuit from different groups, but how is the administration preparing for this? How are they going to justify this?
Well, it's funny. We've seen a change in strategy just this year. You used to ask the administration, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And they'd say it'll get challenged in court. Now that is no longer an excuse they give. Oftentimes they're going with things, especially like what we saw 2 weeks ago on the border, they know will be challenged, but it shows that they're doing something, and then they want to point back to Congress. So yes, they could very well get a lawsuit on this, but I think they're trying to take hope in the fact that DACA is still alive, although, of course, the makeup of the Supreme Court has changed since the last DACA decision.
Certainly. And Julie, I want to talk about the DACA portion of this executive action, making it easier, at least according to the administration, to get work visas. Will this really streamline the process? What is the process now?
I think what this order is pointing to is a problem within USCIS. That's the agency that has to adjudicate all of these applications, that right now they get really overwhelmed. I've spoken to a lot of DACA applicants who wait maybe a little too late to renew, and all of a sudden they're not able to go to work. In fact, that man who I interviewed today, Javier Castro, he also faced the prospect of not being able to return to his job as a critical care nurse because his DACA almost didn't get renewed. In this case, they want to streamline this, particularly for this one group of DACA recipients who have job offers, especially in highly skilled work, and have degrees in that same area. They say those people should be moved to the top of the track.
And Julia, as we talk about this new executive action, you have some reporting on the efficacy of the last one, which tightened asylum rules. And now we're hearing from the administration, though, that the illegal border crossing numbers are down. But how much of that can be attributed to the policy? How much of it is just time of year?
Right. And how do we define efficacy at this point, right? So we do know that there are some migrants who are still being released with court dates, which goes against the very thing that the White House said they would do by banning access for anyone who crossed the border illegally. But the border numbers are down by about half. We understand that as of yesterday, just over 2,100 migrants crossed the border compared to 2 weeks ago when it was over 4,000.
That's getting close to that trigger number. Remember that they said
1,500.
That's right. I remember when we were talking about this executive action, we're like, oh, that hasn't happened since the beginning. That'll never happen. But here we are, a little. Is that surprising to you as someone who covers this a lot? Yeah,
it was certainly a quick dip. The time I'm reminded by, though, was when they rolled out those asylum restrictions after the end of Title 42. We saw a sudden dip then. And it could be what happens is smugglers, cartels, people who move these people across the border, wait to test the waters, see who might be getting through, and then they'll start bringing more. So sometimes there's an initial drop before people realize, hey, if we flood the zone, bring more people, we could get across. In fact, we're already seeing some smugglers message migrants on these WhatsApp channels telling them, you know what, you should still come, things haven't changed. So could that bring the numbers back up? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, the migrants themselves don't always have the ins and outs of U.S. policy, but the smugglers, the cartels, they definitely pay attention.
They pay attention, for sure.
Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your expertise. And joining me now is Lindsay Teslowski, Executive Director and co-founder of the Immigrant Defenders Law Center. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us. An immigration advocate told us that this is the biggest thing since DACA, the executive actions announced today. Do you agree, and what was your reaction to today's announcement?
I mean, this is absolutely a big deal. This is huge. This will bring relief to hundreds of thousands of families. I can just imagine, and I know we're hearing from clients and our staff and family members and friends in the community, and this is really bringing a lot of hope and optimism to so many people. The ability to get a work permit, the ability to finally actually be able to get their legal permanent residency. And I think it's really important to note here that these are people who were eligible for legal permanent residency by virtue of being married to a U.S. citizen, but for their manner of entry, sometimes 25 years ago. So removing this barrier to them getting on that path to citizenship is really life-changing for so many families. Of course, you know, this does come just 2 weeks after there was a near total gutting of asylum at our southern border. So as immigrant rights advocates, we certainly have have, mixed feelings about these two things happening together. But, really today focusing on the joy for so many families and dreamers and others who are obtaining, long-awaited hope and relief in their cases.
Lindsay, you just said mixed feelings. On that point, I want to talk to you about what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. Around that time, when President Biden announced the executive action tightening the asylum rules, you said that you and others felt betrayed by the Biden administration. Does this make up for that?
I think yesterday, when this news was first breaking, that the announcement would come today, I was actually at a shelter in Tijuana with families, helping to explain to them how limited their options are right now to obtain access to our asylum system. I was sitting with a young mom who's sleeping in a tent on a floor with her 2 children, someone who fled horrific domestic violence in her home country, who is seeking protection. And, I feel that, our organizations in the immigrant rights movement, we know that a country that, today we saw the president say, really values keeping families together, should value that for all families. There should be no exceptions. And so, we continue to fight for policies that will allow people to be welcomed with dignity in the United States. We don't need to, look at these as 2 different situations. People at the border deserve to have their families kept together. They deserve to have due process and dignity as well. And so we're going to continue to fight for that. This doesn't change anything except for the fact that we welcome this news for the families here, and we continue to fight for the families at the border as well.
And Lindsay, last week, the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus said that if you have to do enforcement policy, you have to pair it with something positive. So do you agree with that approach? Is there any enforcement action you believe would work at the southern border?
So we have lots of enforcement action happening at the southern border at all times. What I don't agree with in that statement is that we do not have to have trade-offs whenever we talk about immigration policy. The benefits for people here in the United States do not have to come by impacting and deterring people at the border. We, as a powerful nation, have the ability to do both. We have the ability to have justice and do the right thing, like we saw today with this executive action for hundreds of thousands of families and for dreamers. We also have the ability, when there is political will, to do what is right at the border. And what is right is to do what we would want done for our own families, which is to have people welcomed with dignity, to have an orderly process, to make sure that people can be safely processed and that they can protect themselves, and that we follow U.S. and international law and uphold our obligations to protect those who are seeking protection and who are fleeing persecution in their home countries.
And Lindsay, quickly before I let you go, as we mentioned, a recent poll shows Americans overwhelmingly favored the executive action from the president 2 weeks ago. What is your message to voters who cite immigration and border security as one of their biggest concerns heading into the election? Is it warranted?
As someone who spends a lot of time on the border, I would say that at the border, we have families, we have children, we have people who are fleeing persecution, we have enforcement, we have processes. Right now, what is causing the most chaos is the uncertainty for people. We go into shelters and we explain to people what their legal rights are, but there is a lot of misinformation out there. People at the border who are seeking asylum seek to do this because they want to avail themselves of the system. They want to be processed. They want to be vetted. So I think, in border communities, there isn't that same sense of panic in many cases because there is an understanding of how integral our border communities are and how welcoming and receptive they can be. I would say look at places like California and San Diego as models of what welcoming with dignity can look like.
Lindsay, thank you so much for bringing us your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, the race for Racine. We're heading to that swing county in a swing state where former President Trump is set to take the stage any moment now. Plus, Senate Democrats' new effort to pass a bill to ban bump stocks after the Supreme Court struck down a Trump-era ban last week. We're keeping a close eye on the Hill, where that vote could happen at any moment. You're watching Meet the Press now. Hi, welcome back. The campaign trail is heating up both literally and figuratively today. Right now, former President Donald Trump is on the ground in the battleground state of Wisconsin, getting ready to rally in Racine, where supporters are braving hot temperatures to see Trump in his first trip to the state since his conviction in the Manhattan hush money case. It's also Trump's first trip to Wisconsin since reportedly calling the state's largest city and site of this summer's Republican National Convention, quote, horrible. Though the campaign maintains he was referring to crime, what they say was voter fraud in 2020. NBC's Shaq Brewster is on the ground for us at that Trump rally in Racine. Hello, Shaq. This is Trump's first visit to Wisconsin since the guilty verdict, as we mentioned. It's a hot one in Racine, so what are you seeing?
Yeah, those temperatures are flirting with 90 degrees, or at least expected to as we get later in the day. But that's not stopping the crowd that's out here, Gabe. This seems very much as a standard Trump rally. You have big crowds here, a long line of people outside, a lot of red hats, a lot of shirts, embracing the person who is here trying to win back the state that he lost in 2020. Remember, Donald Trump won the state of Wisconsin in 2016. Biden flipped it in 2020. And this is all part of an effort to win back support here. He won this county narrowly in 2020 while he lost the state. And I think the music just stopped, so you may hear the crowds start to cheer if he walks on stage. But this is part of that big push that you're seeing, not from just the president, or the former president, but also Republicans in this state to win back and make up some ground that they lost a few years ago.
And Shaq, as we mentioned, this is also his first time in Wisconsin since reportedly calling Milwaukee horrible in a closed-door meeting on Capitol Hill. Have you heard any reaction to that?
You know, I did bring it up to some supporters as we were out here, as they were lining in, and one thing that I picked up on is this is not anything that they disagree with. It's not a sentiment in which they disagree with. I tell you, I've been covering Wisconsin for several years and covering Republican events. You hear this from Republican candidates. They talk about crime in the city of Milwaukee, despite the fact that this year it has been going down, despite the fact that you look at the trends across the country. They talk about election integrity, despite the fact that we know that the election was upheld in Milwaukee, that they had a free and fair election. That's not stopping that perception that you hear among Republicans. So if anyone's upset about it, you're not going to hear it at this rally, and at least among his supporters.
Well, Shaq, are we expecting the former president to take a swing at President Biden's executive actions that he announced today regarding immigration?
Right, and you know, it's something that we can expect to come up today. I just looked down because we know our affiliate talked to former President Trump just a couple of minutes ago. We're still waiting on the notes from that interview where we do know it was at least asked. But I'll tell you, his supporters have already mentioned it to me about how they're upset about it. And if you watch former President Trump, you know this is a top issue from him. You know this is something he will likely bring up. But Gabe, I'll tell you one thing we can also expect him to bring up is the economy and manufacturing. And that's something that Democrats here have been almost daring him to mention. And that's because they want to highlight and have already highlighted through billboards, through some press conferences earlier today, that it was President Biden who was able to bring a big plant to this area just last year in a way that former President Trump didn't in 2018. So that is a message that you'll likely hear, and you can expect to hear him push back on President Biden in that immigration announcement when he hits the stage any minute now.
Shaq Brewster live for us in a sweltering Wisconsin. Shaq, thank you. And you know what we like to say around here. If it's Tuesday, someone is voting somewhere. Today is primary day in Virginia and Oklahoma, and it's runoff day in Georgia. Among the races we're watching most closely is whether two incumbent House Republicans could lose their primaries. In Virginia, Congressman Bob Good is in serious danger of losing his seat. As we told you yesterday, he's facing a challenger who's been endorsed by both Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy. Good, chair of the far-right Freedom Caucus, drew the ire of Trump for initially backing Ron DeSantis in the presidential primary. He also voted to oust Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. In Oklahoma, Congressman Tom Cole, the chairman of the powerful House Appropriations Committee, could be in trouble. He's facing a primary challenge from businessman Paul Bondar. Cole has Trump's endorsement, but Bandar has poured millions of dollars of his own money into his campaign, allowing him to blanket the airwaves with ads. And up next, my interview with the parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin, an American Israeli who was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th, 256 days ago. Their message to world leaders as their family holds out hope for all remaining hostages. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Ahead of a trip to Washington to address Congress in the coming days, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a video statement today, lashing out yet again at the Biden administration's decision to withhold some weapons from Israel amid the ongoing war in Gaza. Speaking in English, Netanyahu described the, quote, candid conversation he had with Secretary of State Antony Blinken during his visit to Israel last week.
I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case.
Hours later, Blinken was asked about those comments and whether they were an accurate characterization of that conversation. Here's what he said.
We, as you know, are continuing to review one shipment that President Biden has talked about with regard to 2,000-pound bombs because of our concerns about their use in a densely populated area. Like Rafah, that remains under review. But everything else is moving as it normally would move.
It comes as the Israeli Defense Forces says it intercepted 3 aerial targets that crossed over from Lebanon into northern Israel, as tensions between Israel and Hezbollah continue to escalate. Joining me now is NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons in Beirut. Thank you, Keir. Good to have you here. Tensions in the regions are high, and the ceasefire proposal President Biden outlined last month seems to be in limbo. So what's the latest on the ground, Keir?
Well, there are continuing fears that there could be conflict escalating here on the border between Lebanon and Israel. That's why we've seen the president's senior advisor, Amos Hochstein, here in Lebanon, in Israel, trying to dampen down those fears, trying to de-escalate. Now, as we've said many times, it escalated to a serious level last week. But on the other hand, so far over these 9 months, we haven't seen a full-scale war between Hezbollah and the Israelis. Hezbollah itself has said over the last 9 months it doesn't want that. And while the Israelis are threatening if Israelis aren't able to get back into villages along the border, and Lebanese too are not able to get into their villages along that same border, while the Israelis are threatening, it's difficult to tell whether those are signals or whether it portends to something more serious in the weeks and months ahead. It continues to be unpredictable, this situation in the region.
Keir Simmons, live for us in Beirut. Keir, thank you. Polin and Rachel Goldberg-Polin, the parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin, an Israeli-American who was taken hostage by Hamas on October 7th. Thank you both so much for being here. It has been 256 days since your son was taken by Hamas. I see it there written on your chest, over your heart. What keeps you going?
I think it's a primal, natural, innate response of any parent or loved one. If you think that your child is in danger, or you know for a fact that they're in a very treacherous situation, that you spring into action and try to save them. And we have been doing that every single day since October 7th, when Hersh was stolen from us, and all the other hostage families are doing the same thing.
And John, you met with lawmakers on Capitol Hill today. What was your message to them?
The message was basically 256 days of captivity is 256 too many. We met with Dems, we met with Republicans, and the message was clear, not only from us to them, but among themselves. This is not a political issue. This is not Democrats. It's not Republicans. This is a human issue. And 256 days of captivity, it's got to end. And I remind you that most of these hostages were pulled out of their beds or pulled from, like our son, a music festival. These are people who just got caught up in a terrible day, in a terrible situation, and it's time to end this.
Look, I can't imagine what it must be like for you two, hearing what we hear, on a daily or weekly basis. There's so many, there might be an announcement that we might be close to a deal, and then a few days later, that deal doesn't materialize. A few weeks ago, President Biden laid out this three-phase ceasefire deal, and there was a lot of talk that we might be on the verge of this. How has it been for you over the last several days to see that it isn't quite there?
Well, we've been down this road before. So this is not our first rodeo with having this roller coaster ride. And our whole community of hostage families feel this way. So when we hear that things might be happening or that there's movement, we are optimistic and we are hopeful because that is mandatory. But we are also realists. And until we are holding our son in our hands and hugging him, it's not over.
Do you feel that the situation is closer now than it has been in the past, or you really don't know?
It's a very fair question, and it's really, at least for us, it's not known. We keep having these whispers of maybe, and then it swings back the pendulum to maybe not. I am hoping that things are happening behind closed doors. There's so much suffering in the region on both sides. The people, the regular people on both sides of this horrible conflict are desperate for the suffering to end.
And John, Secretary Blinken said today that the gaps are bridgeable, in his words, but right now that it's really in Sinwar's hands. Do you think that the momentum for this deal, there will be less momentum the longer this drags out?
There's no question. Time does not help the hostages. Time does not help the deal. We need the parties to all feel a sense of urgency. And until they feel that sense of urgency, I do think that the risk to everybody involved from time passing is against all of us. And the sad part of the way you asked it even is it's not just that time is hurting the hostages. Time is hurting so many innocent people in the region who are caught up in this, and the leaders just can't seem to find a way to solve it. But every day that passes without a deal, it's bad for the region.
And Rachel, yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu dissolved the war cabinet in Israel. Do you think that helps or hurts the negotiations for this ceasefire?
I'm not sure, truly. I think that there have been a lot of questions about the effectiveness of the war cabinet. Recently, 2 of the sitting members chose to leave, and I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision to dissolve it surely must mean that it wasn't doing whatever it needed to do.
And I don't mean to get you into a political discussion here because I know that is not your focus. I'm just curious, as parents have so much at stake here. A couple of weeks ago, I asked President Biden at one of his events whether he thought that Prime Minister Netanyahu was playing politics with the war, because during a Time magazine interview that it published earlier that day, he seemed to suggest that, that there was every reason for people to think that. But President Biden said no when I asked him. He said that the Prime Minister was dealing with a serious problem he has. Do you see it the same way as President Biden, or do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu could possibly be dragging this out?
I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu understands that there can be no picture of victory without bringing home these hostages. So I know that he is motivated for victory. I know that a piece of that is bring home the hostages, so he's got to be motivated to bring them home. Israel's a parliamentary system, so you've got different interests in different parties within the coalition pulling the prime minister in different directions. I'm not giving him a free pass. I'm not trying to explain what the complexity is here. At the end of the day, he's got to deliver. Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to speak to Congress in a few weeks. And I don't know what he will say to Congress if there are still 120 hostages sitting in tunnels in captivity. This has to get done for him.
What do you want to hear from him when he comes to Congress in a few weeks? What do you want to hear?
We would love to hear him saying, thank you, America, for all the support these past many months during this extremely tenuous time. And I am thrilled that we have a deal and that the hostages are home. That's what I would love to hear him talking about when he comes to Congress.
Thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Rachel Goldberg-Polin and John Polin, parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin, who has been in captivity, taken by Hamas 256 days ago. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for telling the story.
After the break, a major Midwestern warning sign for President Biden as polling shows former President Trump with a nearly 20-point lead in Iowa. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Turning to the 2024 presidential race and a state poll that caught our eye this week. It's not from a key battleground or even from a bellwether state, but from reliably red Iowa. A well-respected Des Moines Register Mediacom poll has former President Trump up 18 points in the Hawkeye state, hitting 50% in a multi-candidate field among likely voters. And here's why this matters. Back in 2020, Trump carried Iowa by just 8 points. While it's only June, this poll from a high-quality pollster shows a 10-point swing from that 2020 result. And if you carry just a fraction of that swing over to neighboring Wisconsin, where other polls show a margin of error race, that could be more than enough to tip the balance in a crucial battleground. So let's get right to the panel. Joining me now here on set is Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent for USA Today, Simone Sanders Townsend, former senior advisor to Vice President Harris and co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC, and Stephen Hayes, editor and CEO of The Dispatch, and also an NBC News political analyst. Thank you all so much for joining me here. Francesca, I want to start with you. We just mentioned that new Des Moines Register poll that has Trump up 18 in Iowa. We mentioned that was a 10-point swing from 2020. Polls also show a relatively close race in Wisconsin, though. Can those two results exist at the same time? How do you explain that?
Well, Iowa's been a reliably red state, and I should, by the way, note that this is a USA Today network paper as well, that conducted this poll. But I think one of the numbers that is probably pretty concerning for the Biden team in a poll like this is the youth voter number at 15% job approval rating for the president. A couple months ago, it was 21% among voters under the age of 35 in Iowa. So that was a drop of six points in just a few months' time. Now, granted, the same numbers said that they disapprove as had disapproved before. But when you look at that key voting bloc that the president needs to turn out in this election, I think it's really symptomatic of the problem he's having with young voters around the country.
So, Simone, on that point, Democrats, we've been hearing from them time and time again that the Midwest is what's going to save President Biden because he has some diminishing support in the Sun Belt in places like Arizona and Nevada. Should these polls spook Democrats?
Look, I think it is, as someone that I spent a lot of time in electoral politics for years, as y'all know, and polls are not predicative, right? They should inform. You do polling to inform your strategy, to get a temperature test, but polls do not predict what is going to happen when people go to the ballot box. And so I would say that Democrats need to look at every single poll, but also juxtapose what they're seeing in the polls from what's happening on the ground, from their reports from their field organizers, the knocking doors, and then make sure they're doing their own internal polling regularly throughout the week. This polling to me says, one, I was on that plane when Joe Biden left Iowa the last time he was there for that last election, and I'd never been so happy to get out of the Hawkeye state. And I say that as a Nebraskan. So, I don't know if there's one Democrat that's elected statewide currently in Iowa, and they're not a high-ranking Democratic representative. So I would just note, I don't think what happens in Iowa is necessarily indicative of what's happening in Wisconsin or Michigan.
So, a Nebraskan, you're Stephen, Wisconsin well. How do you see this playing out in Wisconsin?
Yeah, look, there's a reason I think that other Democrats are alarmed by this poll, and there are really two reasons. One, Ann Seltzer is regularly regarded, people say, gold standard Ann Seltzer poll. She's very good. She's been very accurate over the last several cycles, even when other bigger pollsters have missed. So people take her seriously. because Iowa and Wisconsin have similar profiles, I agree with Simone, they're not exactly the same. You can't just say one translates to the other. But they're similar enough in profile that this should be alarming to Democrats. This should have Democrats concerned.
And Francesca, back to our beat at the White House. As we were mentioning earlier in the program, President Biden announced that new executive action on the border. Do you think that this executive action was meant as a way to blunt criticism from the progressives on the last one that he did 2 weeks ago, tightening the asylum rules? How do you think that the White House is using this potentially in an election year? What are the politics of this new executive action?
Well, the president today said that he's not trying to play politics with immigration and that he would have wanted Congress to do something in a bipartisan manner. They didn't do that, so now he's acting. But he did directly address some of those critics that you're talking about. He noted that some of them were at the White House today, that they were standing behind him. So it is a balancing act here. But one thing that the White House is also trying to do is reclaim the narrative around immigration. He repeatedly talked today about how he wasn't separating families, and the White House stressed that as well. He indeed brought up Trump by name and brought up comments about poisoning the blood of America. So it's also about drawing a contrast with the Republican nominee, who, again, he mentioned by name.
And so we're actually getting some new reaction from former President Trump, who is speaking right now in Racine. He says he loves Milwaukee, by the way, but what you got to fix is the crime. And there was also a chant that broke out at the rally among the crowd saying, "Send them back," essentially a response to that new executive action. And I want to put up the Trump campaign's response earlier today to that executive action. The campaign says, quote, "Biden's mass amnesty plan will undoubtedly lead to a greater surge in migrant crime. Biden has created another invitation for illegal immigration through his mass amnesty order." So besides a fact check here that, there are no statistics that suggest any surge in migrant crime from undocumented immigrants. In fact, there are many studies that show that they commit crimes proportionally less than the general population. But what do you make of the Trump campaign and trying to really maintain this issue as a top issue for them?
I think they have been successful in muddying the waters on this, to the point where I have heard a lot of individuals today talk about this in the context of border enforcement and immigration. When these are with the executive actions that the president took a couple weeks ago that angered some of those same people that were standing behind him. I mean, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez from Illinois was behind the president today with her husband, who is undocumented. So, and she has been an outspoken critic of this administration when it comes to immigration policy and immigration reform. So those were enforcement actions. This was not about any new folks who are coming to the border right now. This is particularly the 12th anniversary of DACA is today, which I think is very important for why this event happened today, because the majority of those first cohorts of DACA recipients are people who are going to benefit from this particular policy. 12 years later, the DACA population remains largely unchanged. 500,000 people, and half of those folks are married to American citizens. They're undocumented, and now today they will be on a path to citizenship.
Simone, I know you work for Vice President Harris as spokesperson, and you know how complex the issue of the border. I know.
Oh, you telling? I was there.
That's right. That's right.
There.
Vice President Harris was tasked with looking at root causes of migration. Certainly not an easy subject. So I'm curious, what do you make of Democrats over the last couple of months trying to seize this issue back from Republicans? It's a tall order, considering that for so long it was Republicans that really wanted to talk about immigration. Democrats preferred not to.
Yeah, they preferred not to. I think a lot of folks at the White House early on thought this was a political liability to actually discuss. They didn't want to engage in the conversation because the conversation is nuanced, and nuance is not something that my Republican friends out there who support President Trump actually traffic in. I think it was a missed opportunity, but I'm glad that they are being more forceful now. You know, I saw some numbers that said border crossings are down 2,000 yesterday, 2,000 people down. That is significant, I think, and those numbers haven't been seen since 2020. Is it going to make a difference in how people think about immigration and what this administration is doing before November? I don't know.
You know, Stephen, a new CBS YouGov poll has a majority of Americans being in favor of mass deportations. Yeah. Does that mean that Trump's rhetoric has won?
No, I think, in fact, people are paying attention to the reality. The problem, I think, that the Biden administration faces, this has been a 3-year policy failure. It just hasn't worked. If you look at the White House itself, they denied for years that this was a crisis, and all of a sudden now they're pivoting to address what I think is pretty obviously a crisis. If you look at President Biden's approval rating on immigration, I think it's the second biggest political vulnerability. In the last 5 polls, negative 34, negative 28, negative 30, negative 29, negative 30. That's a huge political problem. So I think what you're seeing the president do right now, he's flailing. He had this changes on asylum policy just a couple weeks ago. Now he's trying to appease the people who were frustrated, as you reported at the time, who were frustrated with those policies. This is a president who's flailing.
But isn't it a good political message, this idea that just several months ago it was Republicans that killed that border funding bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's look, Republicans should be faulted for what they did, right? I mean, they came out and said, we want to kill this because President Trump wants us to kill this. I mean, it's politically cowardly.
So you disagree with him? Mike Johnson said, oh, they wanted something tougher, that you know, the bill that they were going in the House. So you think that was a bad move?
I think they did want something tougher. They
but
have
you
to
think
deal with the
should have gone
realities.
with the bill they had in front of them?
I do. I definitely do. I think it would have made a difference. I think it would have been helpful to solving the problem. I think for the problem that we face as people who want progress on immigration reform is that for 2 decades, both political parties have wanted this as an issue more than they wanted to solve the problem.
I think I don't know any Democrats that wanted immigration as an issue for them. I do think that they had not played hardball enough. And I would just note, you know, I remember in discussing conversations during the campaign with then candidate Biden, and he is someone that does not believe in legislating by executive action or executive order. So the fact that he took action today on undocumented spouses and then did the enforcement action, to me says he's just like, somebody got to do something, because Joe Biden does not want to do those executive actions.
Simone Sanders, Stephen Hayes, and Francesca, thank you so much for being here. Always good conversation when the three of you are here. Really appreciate it. And still to come, we're live on Capitol Hill, where a Senate Republican just blocked an effort to ban bump stocks by unanimous consent, days after the Supreme Court threw out a Trump-era federal ban. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're keeping an eye on a couple of developing stories in the Senate today, where Boeing CEO just wrapped up testimony before a subcommittee about his company's safety standards following a series of Boeing airplane mechanical failures. During that hearing, the CEO, Dave Calhoun, apologized to families of victims of recent incidents involving Boeing planes. We're also following the Senate's attempt to pass legislation restoring a ban on bump stocks. Democrats were looking to pass the bill under unanimous consent, but a Republican Senator, Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, has already blocked that effort. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us now live from the Hill. So, Ryan, let's start with this vote on bump stocks. What's happening right now?
Well, the path to getting a bump stock bill passed has now become increasingly more difficult. The Democrats in the Senate were hoping that they could pass this bill under what's called unanimous consent, which would basically mean they put it on the floor, ayes and nays. If it passes, it passes. But it only takes one Republican to block that from happening, and Senator Pete Ricketts was the person to do that. So that means that if a bill like this is going to have to pass, it's going to have to go through a much more lengty process. It's going to need 60 votes in order to pass the Senate, which is obviously a much higher bar and would require a lot more Republican support than it would if it were to pass under unanimous consent. What's interesting about this, Gabe, is that this is a proposal that by and large most Republicans have been supportive of. Keep in mind that it was implemented during the Trump administration with President Trump's support in the wake of the Las Vegas mass shooting. But now in the reality here of attempting to try and pass any sort of legislation that would limit the rights of gun owners, any form of gun control, you see Republicans backing away. So the idea that this is something that's going to happen quickly now seems as it's not going to happen very quickly as a result of what we saw play out here today.
Is there a better chance at this passing at all after November?
I mean, it really depends on how the election plays itself out, Gabe. We've kind of entered this period of time on Capitol Hill where it's almost a silly season, where there isn't really going to be much substantive legislation passed until after the election. Both sides are reluctant to move forward any sort of legislation that could either be helpful or hurtful during the election, and they've really passed all the major pieces of legislation that need to be done before the end of the year. They will have to deal with spending in the fall. But to answer your question, maybe it's more likely after the election, but it really depends on the results of that election before we know for sure.
And Ryan, before I let you go, Boeing CEO faced tough questions about his company's safety record. Anything actually happen as a result of today's hearing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gabe. And I do think that Congress does have some ability here to change the way Boeing conducts itself. The company is a huge client. The federal government is a huge client of Boeing's, and so therefore future appropriations packages could have some level of oversight into the way they do business. And also keep in mind the airline industry is one of the most heavily regulated industries in America, and the FAA has very direct oversight into what Boeing does. So there could possibly be substantive changes to the way they do business. What those are, we'll have to wait and see.
Ryan Noble's live for us on the Hill. Ryan, thank you. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and I'm back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.